Last year, a friend of mine published a book called Trust the Whisper. It's a book filled with stories of people who heard a voice inside of them urging them to do something special, often against the odds. Those whispers, for many of us, are the trailheads to our true callings. I consider myself fortunate to be one of those people who's always been really clear about my own whisper. I think it started when I was 6 years old, when my baby sister was born. After I got over the shock of her not being a boy as I had requested, I quickly turned into the other parent. I wanted to hold her and change her diaper. She was my baby too. And to this day, she'll tell you that she also grew up with 3 parents. That love and call to protect children continued as all my baby cousins were born, and I found myself in this caregiver role. And when most teenagers are taking their dates to the Walmart parking lot for cruising, yes, that's what we did in our small town, I took my dates to babysitting jobs with me. In fact, my mother tells a story I don't even remember, but I apparently did a school project where I wrote a paper about becoming a lawyer to represent children. The whisper was pretty clear. When I turned 18, I had the opportunity to take a job working with children in a residential program for what they would call at-risk children at the time. It was just a year later when I became a volunteer guardian ad litem. That's an advocate in the court system for children who've experienced abuse and neglect, someone to speak for their best interest. By the time I was 20, I took my first guardian ad litem sex abuse case. I remember being in court waiting. I knew I was going to meet the perpetrator that day. The perpetrator was the stepfather of my client. I expected a man kind of greasy with a long trench coat and a wispy mustache to walk in. And instead, this man in a really expensive suit, a handsome man, walked in and introduced himself to me. He was not only the perpetrator, he was a doctor at the local hospital. I remember it was like the top of my head blew off, and it turned everything upside down. Everything I thought was true was no longer true, and I believed from that moment on that any child could be vulnerable. That continued to push me as that whisper moved me on to law school to become a child advocate attorney. And when I graduated and passed the bar, moved to the big city to do my dream job, I was 25 years old. I started spending my days in mental health hospitals for very young children. When I wasn't in a mental health hospital, I was often in a detention center where my clients lived in small cells and were often in shackles. If you've never seen a child in shackles, it changes you. I was more committed than ever to being a voice for them. That whisper was strong. But about that time, I started to hear some other messages. These messages weren't my typical whisper. These messages were from my body. By the time I was in my late 20s, I was having chronic migraines, digestive problems, insomnia, vivid nightmares, and debilitating back pain. My body was trying to tell me something. Something wasn't right. But I never learned to listen to my body. I didn't know that it was trying to protect me from the things I was experiencing every day. In fact, I was angry with my body. It was betraying me and my calling. Why couldn't it just be less sensitive, less caring? As if the children I served needed someone to care about them less. You see, 2 pivotal experiences in my life changed my life forever. One happened in the middle of the night. You see, I thought I was a good child advocate because I could compartmentalize. I had work here and my life over here, and never the twain shall meet. But as soon as I was in a position to let my guard down, let my defenses down, it would all come flooding back to me. Sunday mornings were the worst as I sat in church and the tears would come, but sometimes they would come in the middle of the night. I remember waking up after an especially vivid, horrible nightmare about one of my clients. And I did something I'd never done before. I reached my bedside table and I opened the Bible to a random page. And the page I opened was to Matthew 18:10. And I read these words, I think, for the first time. See that you do not despise even one of these little ones. because their angels in heaven always see the face of our Father. Their angels? My kids had angels? It was the first time I felt like I wasn't alone in advocating for them, that I didn't have to do it by myself. That message started to seep into my system. As I continued into my calling, eventually I became the boss and started hiring other young lawyers, sending them into detention centers, into mental health hospitals. And unfortunately, I started seeing them start to develop some of the same symptoms that I had developed. It wasn't until about 2008 that the next pivotal thing happened to me. By that time, I was in my early 30s. I was married with 2 small children, and I just had my first of 2 back surgeries to try to eradicate the back pain. It was then when somebody handed me a body of research and said, "Have you read this? It's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study." It was one of the largest public health studies ever done about the things that happen in childhood having a long-term impact on the health of those children. And it was like the world opened up. Everything I had seen and experienced with all of my clients was finally validated, that what that happened to them had long-term impacts on their little minds and bodies and spirits. See, I started to learn about how beautifully and wonderfully we are made because our nervous system is built to protect us. See, we have this thing called the sympathetic nervous system that responds when we are in danger. It's the part of our brains and our bodies that are built to protect us if a lion is going to attack us. That sympathetic nervous system comes online and you all of a sudden can fight or flee or freeze, whatever you need to do to stay safe. And when the threat dissipates, the parasympathetic nervous system comes on, calming your nervous system, letting you literally rest and digest again. It is how our bodies were made to work. But unfortunately, the children I had worked with did not have lions in the typical sense. Their lions may be a father with a drinking problem, and they never knew when he would lash out to abuse them or their mother. Or maybe their lion was a mother with a mental health issue who was nurturing and loving one day and absent and completely vacant the next. Those things had long-term impacts, and I started to really try to learn about what it meant to invest in trauma-informed care. I read everything. I did everything I could to become an expert in trauma-informed care, and what I learned is that you can help a child heal. My whisper continued to change and to morph, and my family and I picked up our whole lives and moved to the western North Carolina mountains to lead Crossnore Communities for Children because they were all about building a sanctuary for children where they could heal, where they could reclaim their belief in a safe and loving home, and their little minds and bodies could be restored. It was beautiful, and it was based in science. It was something that could be done. And yet, the whisper was strong, but the warnings kept coming. The back pain didn't go away, nor did the migraines, nor did some of the issues around sleep and digestion. And I continued to see this in other of my colleagues. I started to read researchers like Dr. Sandra Bloom and Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and Dr. Dan Siegel and start to understand that there is a real part of trauma that many of us were never taught in school. And that was about secondary and vicarious trauma. It meant that sometimes our bodies can't tell the difference between what's happening to us and the stories we are hearing about what's happened to others. That my body was literally absorbing those traumatic stories on a daily basis. That's when I started to think about what it would be like if all of our organizations knew this science, not only about trauma, but also about how to build resilience. It's when the whisper continued to change and to help me really focus on the fact that how do we help people be healers without being hurt in the process? You see, I'm here to give you today both a whisper and a warning. The whisper is, there are wonderful healers in this community. Did you know that there are people in this community called forensic interviewers. All they do all day, every day, is listen to stories of children and their experience of child sexual abuse. And then we expect those folks to go home and to parent, to allow their children to go to school events and sleepovers and birthday parties without debilitating fear. We expect them to have a normal sex life with their partner. There are people in this community that work in domestic violence shelters, many of whom have experienced domestic violence themselves. And every day they welcome in women and children whose lion never sleeps. We have medical professionals who walk with individuals and families in the last moments of their lives and help usher them to the afterlife. We have social workers who take very scared children from very scary places and their lives turned upside down. We have teachers in high-poverty schools who spend their weekends wondering if some of the children from their class will have enough food to make it till Monday. See, these are our community healers, and we need them to live into their callings. In fact, some of their whispers and their callings have saved some of our lives. But we also have to recognize that there's warnings that are happening with them all the time. So what do we do about that? How do we, as a community, respond when a group of people are literally holding the grief and the pain of an entire community, many times inside their bodies? You see, there are some things we can do. What the science tells us is that children can heal from trauma if they have attuned caregivers in safe and nurturing environments and opportunities to experience mastery and experience a plan for the future and realize that there's something bigger than them out there. Their brains and bodies can heal. But also, we know now that people who experience secondary trauma can be protected from that, can build their resilience, and have the support they need. So what does that mean for you? Many of you have not been called. That's not your whisper to be one of the healers in the community, and that's fine. But here's what we need you to know. We need radical community resilience. And when I say radical, it means from the roots. We have to do things differently. So what I would ask you today is that you would find the helpers and the healers in your life. Look them in the eyes and tell them you see the burden that they're carrying, that they are not alone, and that you want to be part of their support system. You can also be a safe place for them to drain their emotions. They don't want to tell you all the worst stories they see. They don't want to harm you. But they need a place to confidentially and safely drain the emotions that any normal human would have, given what they do every day. And when you, as a Hope You Do, give your time and your money to the organizations that provide hope and healing in this community, ask the people who lead those organizations how that money and time will benefit the staff. They need living wages. They need medical care and insurance, especially mental health care. And they need paid time off so they can rest and let their parasympathetic nervous system come back online. You see, there's incredible resilience in these mountains. Incredible beauty, wonderful artisans, beautiful rivers and hiking. But one of the most beautiful things about this community are the people who are holding the healing here. And we have a responsibility to all of them. And my last words are to the healers. If your whisper has become a calling, and your calling has become a career, I want you to know that you matter. Your experiences matter. And your community values you, and we want to support you. And remember always that your warnings are just another essential part of your whisper.